What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Luke Innes here. I'm going to be continuing on with the third part of my Wes Craven directed films review series, celebrating the life of the great man. Today I am going to be covering Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994. Now, New Nightmare stars, amongst others, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, Wes Craven himself, Robert Englund. Plot-wise, this movie takes place outside of the world of Nightmare on Elm Street. It takes place in the real world. In this movie, rather than being Nancy Heather Langenkamp, he's Heather Langenkamp. She's married with a son. The Nightmare on Elm Street movie franchise has come to an end. It becomes apparent that there's an evil force at work that is very unhappy with the fact that the franchise is coming to an end. More and more people attached to the original movies are coming into danger. It becomes clear that the evil force may very well be Freddy himself. The first thing that's got to be really commended about New Nightmare is just how original of a concept it is straight off the bat. You know, it's a really intelligent idea for a movie, I guess. Not just because they kind of said, oh, let's put this into the realms of it's just a film, but also because the way that it's constructed is quite intelligent. You know, the idea that, you know, the evil was captured in the films, and now that the films have come to an end, the evil is free to roam. It's sort of this idea that the sort of metaphorical boogeyman going back centuries has been, you know, sort of kept dormant by, you know, these scary movies. And in general, obviously, I've got to echo what a lot of people like about this movie, and that's the fact that Freddy is cool again in this movie. You know, by the point of Freddy's dead, he'd become a joke, and in this movie they kind of parody that a little bit as well. You know, in this he's a lot more like he is in the first movie. You know, he's a very intimidating sort of ghostly figure. You know, he isn't acting all goofy and, you know, delivering one-liners and whatnot. That's obviously a really cool thing to get that out of Freddy Krueger after all this time of him being kind of more of a comedy character than a horror one. It's nice to get him, you know, being genuinely a bit creepy and a bit scary. I also like what they did with how he looks as well. He looks a lot less artificial in this movie than he did in the sort of couple of movies previous. He genuinely looks like he's kind of been skinned in spots rather than just looking kind of plasticky. You know, the kind of the burns lost meaning over time, I guess. Another really cool thing about this movie is that it does take on some of the factors that were cool about the other Elm Street movies, aside from the one that Wes Craven directed. You know, obviously from part 3 onwards, there was kind of this thing of the idea of fighting Freddy in kind of his own world, if you will, was kind of a common thing, and that carries over into this movie as well. And I think it's cool that they kind of continued that lineage into this, even though it was kind of supposed to be a bit of an embrace of the original. They did manage to keep that sort of thing in there as well. Obviously the film's not without its problems. I mean, you know, some of the stuff about, you know, the actors playing themselves feels a bit hokey. You know, Heather Langenkamp and Nancy, I can't really find the line of where the two separate, you know, because in this movie it feels like Heather is basically playing Nancy again. And then obviously, as well as that, you know, you've got like the relationship between Heather's character and John Saxon's character is pretty much the same as it was in the movie. You know, they have like a father-daughter relationship, even though in this movie they're not a father and daughter. They're two actors who played a father and daughter. So that's kind of a shame that they couldn't nail that and kind of get that being really convincing. The other problem with the movie, it's just got a really low body count. There's a lot of time spent explaining stuff and not a lot of time focused on action. You know, I kind of like the fact that this is a lot less in your face. You know, Freddy gets a lot less screen time in this movie than he has in any movie probably since the first, which is definitely you know, a step in the right direction. You know, one of the issues with the previous movies was overexposure to the threat. You know, it became less scary as a result. But like I say, I can see that they wanted to move away from, you know, the sort of, in the, you know, particularly in film 3 onwards, the focus was on kind of creative kills, which, you know, this entry clearly wanted to move away from. Although it does have its share of creativity, it obviously wanted to focus more on the story. Overall, I feel like New Nightmare is an experiment that kind of in a way failed, because it didn't trigger off kind of a trend the way that it probably was trying to. It is quite an early sort of example of metatextuality in horror, which obviously in a future film, which I may or may not be covering, Wes Craven would extend that kind of metatextuality idea, and it would become a big part of horror lore for some time after. So I mean, overall I'm going to give New Nightmare an 8 out of 10. It is a very enjoyable watch, even though it does drag a little bit in places and there are some very apparent problems with it. This is definitely a return to form after the very, very weak Freddy's Dead for the franchise. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. There is a link to my podcast in the description below. Join me tomorrow for day 4 of the Wes Craven week of brilliantness, where I will be covering the next of the 5 Wes Craven movies I've chosen to cover for this little marathon. Peace out, ladies and gents.